For all the crazy stuff happening in the United States, off the coast of Venezuela, in the Persian Gulf, and within the largest land war in Europe in 3/4 of a century, arguably the boldest move of 2026 is coming out of the Indo-Pacific. Taiwanese media is reporting that Taipei has plans to forward deploy HIMARS vehicles to combat any potential invasion from the People's Republic of China. Now, Taiwan operating HIMARS is not new. We will circle back to the island's acquisition of the system later. What is new is the idea of a forward deployment. Even that notion seems strange because Taiwan is just an island, so forward deployment would seem impossible. Except Taiwan is not actually just an island. The government's administrative boundaries extend to some islands very close to PRC territory. Indeed, the parts that we care about for today are Penghu and, more aggressively, Dongyan. This raises the question of whether we are about to encounter a Taiwan missile crisis of sorts, where Taiwan attempts to forward deploy a weapon system, the superpower on the receiving end objects, and we end up in a political emergency over the military situation. My placeholder name deliberately alludes to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviet Union attempted to forward deploy intermediate-range ballistic missiles to Cuba. The discovery sparked 13 days of worldwide panic until Khrushchev ultimately withdrew them. Well, a potential Taiwan missile crisis could have the same markings, except fortunately less nuclear. So, today, let's examine Taipei's plan here and investigate whether it could boil over into something more serious. But we should begin by mapping out the practical changes to the strategic environment. In the last few years, undoubtedly prompted by what has been happening in Ukraine, Taiwan has become especially interested in purchasing HIMARS vehicles in bulk. That may seem surprising given that HIMARS in Ukraine is an army-operated asset and a key to success in a land-based battle. In contrast, a war in the Taiwan Strait would be primarily a naval battle, and so Taiwan, in theory, ought to be focused on purchasing naval assets. Well, a few points there. 1. The broader Western coalition wants to exploit divisions of labor. Normally, we talk about this in the context of it being a foundational principle of NATO. Here, though, it means that Taiwan recognizes that the United States is the world leader in naval operations, so it is best to leave that part of the engagement to its friend. 2. Taipei is also interested in the capacity to fight back after the PLA makes landfall. HIMARS armed with 70-kilometer ranged Gimler's missiles would be a major part of that plan. The plan to defeat the capital plan's landfall. And 3, HIMARS vehicles can also fire the 300-kilometer ranged ATACMS missiles. These are powerful enough to sink ships and destroy port infrastructure. Looking at a map, it is quite the coincidence that the range of ATACMS from Taiwan is just long enough to strike a couple of naval facilities across the strait. Combining those points together, Taiwan has gone on a HIMARS shopping spree. An initial order went for 29 units. The United States has made the first of these deliveries, and you will be seeing a bunch of images from Taiwan's proud showcase of their shiny new toys for the rest of this video. Furthermore, in December, Trump signed an $11.1 billion arms deal with Taiwan, which included 82 new HIMARS vehicles and a dank 420 ATACMS to fire away. The new wrinkle to Taiwan's strategy is to deploy HIMARS to the Penghu Islands west of Taiwan, aka the Pescadores. The range of ATACMS from there looks like this. The bolder move is to add some HIMARS right on the PRC's doorstep over in Dongyan. The range of ATACMS from there looks like this. So, to recap, this is the current ATACMS situation from just the island of Taiwan. This is the combined ATACMS situation from the planned new deployments. This is the range overall with Taiwan added back in. And this represents the new areas that would be covered that are not currently covered. Apologies for those of you who prefer to listen to me while walking your dogs. You really will want to go back and look at these maps later because they are very informative. #circles on maps. Indeed, if we overlay either PLAN bases or potential departure locations, HIMARS has quite a few targets available. 2 of these are only in range given the planned new deployments. The rest are within the current coverage area, though you can see that they all push the range of ATACMS, while the planned new deployments would put all of those locations comfortably within range. The other thing worth noting is that Taiwan pretty much needs HIMARS here if it wants to plan any sort of forward deployment. Penghu will be one of the PRC's first targets in an invasion simply because it sits inside of the Taiwan Strait. Meanwhile, Dongyin is right next to PRC territory, so it is much easier for Beijing to blast it than the other way around. The point is, any stationary artillery installation would be quickly destroyed if a war in the Indo-Pacific began. You need the mobility of a HIMARS vehicle to shoot and scoot, just as Ukraine has done back in Europe. In fact, Taiwan plans to have them very briefly emerge from underground bunkers to fire their loads before immediately returning to the safety of meters of dirt and concrete. So Taiwan's overall strategy would be to start blasting the PRC's ships and port infrastructure at the first sign of an invasion, then hope that the attrited forces struggle to make landfall. The HIMARS will all eventually be destroyed, but Taipei hopes that they will die heroes. That said, the key question is whether Taiwan will ever get that far. The purpose of the deployments will be to shift the balance of power favorably in Taiwan's direction. But that creates a preventive war incentive for Beijing. Rather than sit back and watch Taiwan make this power play, the PRC instead tries to destroy the shipments as they arrive. Alternatively, the mere threat to do so deters Taiwan from trying in the first place. Again, you can see the parallels to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union tried to establish sizable intermediate-range ballistic missile launch facilities in Cuba without the United States noticing. Moscow would have loved such an outcome. It would eventually obtain the benefit of shifting the balance of power, but there would be no risk of preventive war if Washington was none the wiser. Of course, U-2 spy planes saw what was happening, leading to the 13-day crisis. The United States initiated a quarantine in the Caribbean, not a blockade, because a blockade is an act of war, just as the United States is currently quarantining Venezuela and definitely not blockading it. What is old is new again. Anyway, the pressure of further escalation or an accident triggering a nuclear exchange eventually convinced the Kremlin to remove the missiles from Cuba. In exchange, the United States removed some of its missiles from Turkey. Oh, and the United States also made a flimsy pledge not to meddle in Cuba, which once again has relevance to today's geopolitical situation. Back in Taiwan, things are looking fragile there as well. On a weekly basis, it seems that the PRC is having multiple planes or ships pass the median line along the Taiwan Strait, constantly forcing Taipei to evaluate whether there may be some real military action planned. This has been going on since August of 2022, but remains out of the Western public discourse because Ukraine consumes the vast majority of war-related bandwidth. Lines on Maps thanks you for your vigilance in clicking on this video. The situation has become yet more fragile over the last few weeks. You might remember that the United States pulled the USS Ford from the Middle East to cover the situation in Venezuela. Then the protests in Iran started, and the White House decided that leaving the Middle East uncovered was not such a great idea. Consequently, the Navy then pulled the USS Lincoln from the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East. Long story short, the United States lacks its best asset in the region for the moment. Of course, it is not like the branches of the U.S. Armed Forces have nothing in the Indo-Pacific. It is nice to have allies all around the first island chain. And conceivably, Taiwan could coordinate with the United States to not make the HIMARS play until the United States is prepared to defend against a PRC response. However, the main theoretical point that I want you to take away from today's video is that it might not matter. Indeed, Beijing might just want to let this one go because of the broader long-term security situation in the region. You might remember only a couple of days ago, I mentioned how the United States will attempt to negotiate with Iran over the latter's nuclear program. I explained that this is essentially an effort to smooth a power shift. Iran is weak now, and for the United States to not attack during that window of opportunity, Iran must make itself weaker in the future. It can credibly do that by sacrificing part of its nuclear program. Well, you could apply that same principle of countering power shifts to what is happening in the Indo-Pacific. Beijing is constructing a ton of new metal, and few in the security community have any doubt that the purpose is to prepare for an invasion of Taiwan. It is the entire reason that the Pentagon has spent the last decade trying to shift U.S. priorities from Europe to across the Pacific. Now, that does not guarantee that we will see a war in the future. The way that Beijing would force opponents to concede more in peaceful settlements is by improving Beijing's own war outcome. But I have also spent a feature-length amount of time explaining how the PRC is pessimistic about the very long term, and might want to fight at some point in the medium term. Either way, though, this is bad news for Taiwan. Nonetheless, if you want to look for silver linings of your opponent growing more powerful in the future, it is that you have more leeway in the present. Maybe you deploy HIMARS to peripheral islands. What will the PRC do in response? Invade you? The entire reason that they are spending so much money to construct new vessels is because they do not believe that the likelihood of success right now is good compared to what will be the case in the future. Oh, never mind that Xi just purged his top general. Was it because the general was actually corrupt, as the official charge claims? If so, then the armed forces are likely not in a good place right now to launch an invasion for that reason. Or was it because Xi wanted to secure better control over the government? If so, then the armed forces are still not likely in a good place right now without having actual military leadership. So, under the worst-case scenario, you get invaded at a time when the PRC is not ready to run such an operation. Best-case scenario, and the scenario that is far, far more plausible, the PRC does not do a darn thing about it. Either way, you end up better off than if you had just let the PRC control the situation. To be clear, I do not know how the PRC will actually respond to Taipei's play. I do know, however, that this type of internal balancing is common when one actor faces a rising opponent. We saw only a few months ago Taiwan trying some internal balancing by reaching that $11.1 billion arms deal with the United States. We are seeing it again with the leak that Taiwan will forward deploy some of its HIMARS units. We may be continuing to see it as the tastefully named William Lai, President of Taiwan, proposes increasing defense spending by $40 billion, assuming that Parliament eventually goes through with that. And we will continue to see it as the years pass by, and the clock slowly ticks toward whatever goal date that Xi truly has in mind to reunite the two Chinas. If that type of longer-term thinking excites you, then you will love that aforementioned feature-length dissection of the subject. You will just have to stomach listening to me in the short term for 90 minutes. Godspeed. But if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.